This route is suicide. We must reconsider the attack.
The Americans are waiting for us, sir.
We have suffered heavy losses already.
January 1942. The vast Pacific stretched endlessly under a slate-gray sky, its waters deceptively calm. On the horizon, the silhouettes of Japanese carriers loomed like silent predators, their decks lined with rows of Zero fighters and dive bombers, engines humming with latent power. Inside the command room of the Akagi, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and tension. Officers hunched over charts and maps, their fingers tracing planned attack routes across the coral-studded ocean, each line representing thousands of lives and the ambitions of an empire. A radio crackled somewhere in the distance, carrying fragmented reports. Japanese naval intelligence had long believed the American carriers were crippled, their remnants scattered and incapable of organized retaliation. And yet, whispers began to circulate. A voice on the wire, hesitant at first, reporting sightings of the Enterprise in Yorktown, fully operational, returning from the sea despite earlier attacks. A murmur swept through the room, eyes narrowing, voices lowering. Disbelief mingled with fear. How could these carriers have survived? How could they have returned? The Japanese Navy, confident in its supremacy, felt a rare, uneasy tremor. Somewhere across the water, the Americans were alive, ready to strike, and the balance of power was about to shift in ways no one had anticipated. This revelation, small yet explosive, set the stage for a confrontation that would redefine naval warfare in the Pacific. By late 1941, the Pacific had become a theater of immense strategic stakes. Japan, driven by the need for resources and regional dominance, had executed a swift and devastating strike against Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. The surprise attack had crippled much of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, sinking battleships and leaving the United States reeling. Yet, amidst the chaos, key assets survived. 3 aircraft carriers, Enterprise, Lexington, and Saratoga, remained operational, hidden from immediate Japanese reach. These carriers would prove pivotal in the months to come, even as Japanese planners assumed American naval power had been largely neutralized. Following Pearl Harbor, Japan pursued a rapid expansion across Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands. By January 1942, Japanese forces had secured the Philippines, Malaya, and parts of the Dutch East Indies, controlling vital oil and resource supplies. The Imperial Japanese Navy, flush with success, turned its attention to consolidating its newly acquired territory and projecting naval dominance deeper into the Pacific. Commanders like Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto envisioned a series of decisive engagements that would cripple remaining American naval power, securing Japanese control for the foreseeable future. American intelligence, however, quietly defied Japanese assumptions. U.S. codebreakers, working at Station HYPO in Hawaii, had begun to decipher Japanese communications, uncovering plans that the Japanese believed were secure. The Americans gained unprecedented insight into Japanese fleet movements, carrier assignments, and strategic objectives. This intelligence would prove crucial in countering Japan's seemingly unstoppable advance. Meanwhile, the Japanese Navy had deployed its formidable carrier fleet with meticulous planning. 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, formed the spearhead of Yamamoto's strategy. Each vessel carried dozens of aircraft, primarily Mitsubishi 6 M0s, capable of outmaneuvering most Allied fighters. In theory, these carriers provided the Japanese with unmatched offensive capability, able to project air power hundreds of miles across the Pacific. Their pilots were highly trained, emboldened by early victories, and confident in their ability to dominate the skies. As Japanese forces advanced, the Americans were forced into a defensive posture. Their remaining carriers rushed into repair and redeployment. Despite setbacks, American naval engineers and crews worked with relentless speed, restoring damaged ships and readying aircraft. USS Yorktown, damaged at the Battle of the Coral Sea in May 1942, underwent an accelerated repair process, returning to operational status in just 48 hours, a feat that would later astonish Japanese commanders. The meticulous coordination of repair, crews, pilots, and intelligence officers contrasted sharply with the Japanese assumption of inevitable victory. By early June 1942, the stage was set. Japanese admirals, confident in their overwhelming strength, prepared to strike what they believed was an exposed American fleet. Yet, the Americans had anticipated much of this. Through code-breaking, careful reconnaissance, and rapid repairs, the U.S. Navy had placed its carriers in positions that would allow them to challenge Japanese assumptions. The clash that followed would not be one-sided. The element of surprise, once the Japanese prerogative, had subtly shifted to the Americans, though the Japanese could not yet grasp the magnitude of this reversal. By June 1942, Japanese naval planners were operating under the assumption that American resistance in the Pacific had been effectively neutralized. Their intelligence suggested that only a handful of U.S. carriers remained, most of them damaged or scattered. The Imperial Japanese Navy believed that by executing Operation Imai, an ambitious plan to capture Midway Atoll, they could lure the remainder of the American fleet into a trap and destroy it entirely. Midway, a small atoll roughly 1,300 miles northwest of Honolulu, had emerged as a critical outpost. Its capture would provide Japan with a forward base, threatening Hawaii and potentially forcing the United States into a negotiated settlement in the Pacific. The Japanese approach to Midway was meticulous. 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, formed the backbone of the strike force, supported by battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. Each carrier carried between 60 and 70 aircraft, including Zeros, bombers, and torpedo planes, with crews trained for coordinated, precise attacks. The plan relied heavily on surprise, intelligence superiority, and the expectation that American forces would be incapable of mounting an organized defense. Japanese confidence was bolstered by recent successes: the capture of the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies, and victories over Allied forces in New Guinea. Yet beneath this veneer of certainty, cracks in Japanese assumptions were growing. American codebreakers had partially cracked the Jan. 25 Naval Code, revealing the Midway operation as a target. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, now had critical intelligence allowing him to position his carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and the hastily repaired Yorktown, in a location that would surprise the Japanese strike force. What the Japanese did not anticipate was that the very carriers they assumed destroyed or damaged would emerge fully operational to meet them. The contrast in operational tempo between the two navies was stark. Japanese carriers were at the peak of their offensive capability, but their planning depended on rigid assumptions and underestimation of the enemy's adaptability. American carriers, by contrast, had endured the setbacks of Pearl Harbor, the losses in the Coral Sea, and rapid redeployment. Yet these experiences forged a more resilient and flexible operational model. Pilots who had survived earlier engagements now returned to their carriers with renewed determination, and deck crews worked tirelessly under pressure to maintain aircraft readiness. As the Japanese fleet approached Midway, reconnaissance planes scoured the horizon. Reports of American carrier sightings reached the Japanese commanders sporadically, often dismissed as errors or misidentifications. Confidence remained high, bordering on complacency. Yet, the reality of the Americans' operational return was already in motion. USS Enterprise and USS Yorktown, fully repaired and repositioned, had regained the initiative, poised to strike at the moment the Japanese believed victory was assured. In this climate of expectation and misjudgment, the seeds of shock were sown. The Japanese Navy, confident in its supremacy and eager to deliver a decisive blow, was unaware that the forces they believed defeated were not only alive, but strategically positioned to counterattack. The coming confrontation would not merely be a battle of ships and aircraft. It would be a test of foresight, adaptability, and resilience, qualities the Japanese had underestimated in their enemy. The stage was now fully set for the angles that shaped the battle. Human courage, technological innovation, tactical brilliance, leadership decisions, and psychological dynamics that would culminate in an unexpected shock for the Japanese Navy. In the fleet corridors and on the decks of Japanese carriers, a quiet confidence prevailed. Officers and pilots, hardened by early victories, believed in their invincibility. Yet, war is measured not in assumptions, but in action. Across the Pacific, American sailors and aviators, many still recovering from Pearl Harbor's devastation, prepared under a different kind of pressure. They had lost comrades, seen carriers damaged or sunk, and faced the prospect of overwhelming enemy forces. Despite this, morale was quietly resilient. Pilots of the USS Enterprise and USS Yorktown trained relentlessly, understanding that survival and success required precision and courage. This human element, the ability to persevere in the face of expected defeat, would become a decisive factor when Japanese commanders first saw fully operational American carriers where none should have been. Japanese strategy at Midway relied on meticulous coordination. Carriers were to launch aircraft in synchronized waves to neutralize Midway's defenses, then destroy any American naval response. The plan emphasized overwhelming force, surprise, and precise timing. Yet, the Americans had anticipated much of this. By leveraging code-breaking intelligence, Admiral Nimitz positioned his carriers northeast of Midway, outside Japanese reconnaissance detection. American tactics focused on flexibility, rapid aircraft deployment, use of scouting planes for early warning, and readiness to exploit enemy vulnerabilities. The resulting tactical scenario would place Japanese commanders in unfamiliar territory. Their assumptions about timing, position, and enemy strength shattered before the first bombs were dropped. Technology defined the battle at sea. Japanese carriers carried Mitsubishi Zeros, highly maneuverable fighters capable of dominating most Allied aircraft early in the war. Their torpedo bombers and dive bombers could deliver devastating payloads if unchallenged. Yet American technology was evolving rapidly. The Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bomber, with its reinforced airframe and precision bombing capability, proved lethal against carriers. Radar stations on Midway provided early warnings of incoming Japanese aircraft, allowing U.S. fighters to intercept with calculated efficiency. Additionally, rapid repair technology, exemplified by USS Yorktown's restoration in just 48 hours, defied Japanese expectations of damaged ship recovery. These technological elements created a scenario in which Japanese overconfidence collided with American adaptability and innovation, producing moments of profound shock. Leadership played a pivotal role in the unfolding drama. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of the Midway operation, relied on meticulous planning and the precision of his fleet. Yet, his decisions reflected a confidence in Japanese superiority and an underestimation of American capabilities. In contrast, Admiral Chester W. Nimitz embodied a calculated calm. With access to partially broken Japanese codes, Nimitz positioned his forces strategically, turning intelligence into decisive action. American carrier commanders, Frank Jack Fletcher and Raymond Spruance, executed rapid, adaptive decisions under pressure, deploying aircraft at moments that exploited Japanese vulnerabilities. The clash of leadership styles, rigid assumption versus flexible anticipation, would amplify the shock experienced by the Japanese when confronted with carriers they believed destroyed. From the Japanese viewpoint, intelligence painted a picture of a weakened enemy, retreating in disarray. Observers expected scattered American vessels and minimal resistance. Yet, American forces, hidden and resilient, presented an entirely different reality. Reconnaissance planes reported few sightings. Yet, when American carriers emerged fully operational, Japanese commanders faced disbelief. The enemy they assumed defeated was not only intact, but poised to strike with coordinated ferocity. This miscalculation would prove catastrophic, highlighting the dangers of relying on incomplete intelligence and overconfidence in prior victories. Psychologically, the shock of encountering fully operational American carriers reverberated throughout Japanese command. Sailors and officers, conditioned by early triumphs, confronted the unsettling realization that their assumptions were flawed. Fear, uncertainty, and hesitation crept into decision-making processes. On the American side, morale surged, fueled by the knowledge that resilience and intelligence had turned the tables. The human psyche in warfare, hope, fear, determination, played a central role in shaping both tactical execution and strategic outcomes. These emotional currents would ripple through the fleet as the battle commenced, intensifying the eventual shock and reshaping naval doctrine. June 4th, 1942. Dawn broke over the Central Pacific with a pale, misted light, casting long shadows across the waters near Midway Atoll. Japanese reconnaissance planes scoured the horizon, reporting what they believed were scattered American remnants. Confidence remained high aboard Akagi and Kaga, their decks lined with Zeros, torpedo bombers, and dive bombers. Pilots performed pre-flight checks, engines revving with disciplined precision. Every calculation, every maneuver, was based on the assumption of an American fleet crippled or absent. Unknown to Japanese commanders, U.S. carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and the repaired Yorktown were lying in wait. American crews moved with quiet urgency, launching scouting planes to locate the Japanese fleet while fighters were ready to intercept. The early morning hours were a tense dance of reconnaissance and preparation, the calm before an explosion of fire and steel. At 6:30, American scout planes finally sighted the Japanese carriers. The reports reached Admiral Fletcher and Admiral Spruance immediately. Despite the limited numbers, the Americans were ready. A coordinated strike plan was executed, focusing on simultaneous attacks from multiple directions. The Japanese, confident in their invisibility and superior numbers, were unprepared for the speed and accuracy of the assault. The first American dive bombers approached Kaga, diving through thin clouds to release bombs with surgical precision. Explosions tore through the carrier's deck, sending plumes of smoke and fire into the sky. Moments later, Akagi was targeted in a similar manner, her flight deck erupting as bombs struck amidships. Panic and disbelief swept through the Japanese command rooms. These carriers, expected to dominate the Pacific, were now aflame under an assault from the enemy they assumed destroyed. In the span of a few frantic hours, Soryu and Hiryu were likewise struck. Torpedo bombers and dive bombers exploited gaps in Japanese fighter coverage, overwhelming defensive fire with audacious dives. The human cost was immense. Pilots and sailors scrambled for survival amidst explosions, smoke, and cascading debris. 4 Japanese admirals and officers. The moment crystallized into a singular, shocking truth. The American carriers, thought lost or incapacitated, had returned to deliver decisive blows. By midday, the tide of the battle had shifted irreversibly. The Japanese fleet, once confident and imposing, now faced an unexpected annihilation of key assets. The Americans, leveraging intelligence, tactical innovation, and sheer resilience, had achieved a moment of strategic surprise that would reverberate throughout the Pacific War. The shock experienced by Japanese commanders was not merely operational, it was existential. As the smoke from Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and later Hiryu rose into the morning sky, the scale of the disaster became undeniable. Japanese officers struggled to maintain composure, issuing orders that barely reached their intended targets amid chaos. Firefighting crews battled flames that consumed flight decks, magazines, and hangars, while pilots scrambled to launch any remaining aircraft, many of which were already trapped by smoke and debris. The meticulously planned Midway operation had unraveled in mere hours, leaving Admiral Yamamoto and his staff facing the unthinkable. Their offensive spearhead was being destroyed by forces they had assumed vanquished. The Americans pressed their advantage relentlessly. Dive bombers from Enterprise and Yorktown struck with uncanny precision, while torpedo squadrons, despite staggering losses, pinned Japanese fighters and anti-aircraft crews in defensive maneuvers. USS Yorktown, returning from rapid repairs, launched repeated sorties that crippled Hiryu, the last operational Japanese carrier, ensuring no avenue of recovery remained. The shock for the Japanese was compounded by the realization that the Americans had not only survived, but executed their strikes with a level of coordination and timing that defied expectation. By late afternoon, the once mighty Japanese carrier fleet had been reduced to burning hulks. Yamamoto, observing from his command ship, noted the scale of the catastrophe in stunned silence. Survivors in the water clung to wreckage, while aircraft that had taken off earlier attempted perilous returns to damaged decks. The psychological impact on the Japanese Navy was immediate and profound. A combination of disbelief, fear, and a bitter understanding that their operational assumptions had been fatally flawed. The American fleet, though battered, had achieved a decisive victory through a combination of intelligence, tactical innovation, and sheer resilience. The destruction of 4 Japanese carriers marked a turning point in the Pacific War. Japan's naval supremacy was no longer unchallenged, and the United States had demonstrated an ability to recover, adapt, and strike with devastating effect. The Japanese Navy, accustomed to dictating the terms of engagement, faced a humbling and disorienting reversal. This turning point reshaped the strategic landscape. The Pacific was no longer an uncontested Japanese domain. The shock of encountering carriers that had survived previous attacks would reverberate through Japanese planning, morale, and strategic thinking for months to come. From this moment, the balance of naval power in the Pacific had shifted, setting the stage for counteroffensives, adaptations in tactics and technology, and a reassessment of what resilience could mean in modern naval warfare. In the days following the Battle of Midway, the extent of the Japanese losses became starkly clear. 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, had been sunk along with dozens of supporting aircraft and hundreds of skilled pilots. These losses represented not only a material blow, but a devastating depletion of experienced personnel, which Japan could not quickly replace. Reports from surviving Japanese officers and sailors described a profound sense of disbelief. The carriers they had believed invincible were gone, consumed in hours by strikes launched from ships they had assumed destroyed or incapacitated. On the American side, the victory, though costly, reinforced the resilience of the U.S. Navy. USS Enterprise, USS Hornet, and USS Yorktown had weathered attacks, sustaining damage but remaining operational. Yorktown's rapid repairs, completed in just 48 hours after suffering near-catastrophic damage at the Coral Sea, had been instrumental in allowing the U.S. fleet to meet the Japanese at a critical point. The battle highlighted the effectiveness of code-breaking, reconnaissance, and rapid tactical decision-making, showing that intelligence combined with human determination could overcome seemingly superior forces. The psychological aftermath was equally significant. Japanese naval officers, previously confident in their supremacy, confronted the reality that American carriers could recover and strike with lethal precision. Morale, once high, was shaken by the sudden reversal. For many sailors, the realization that the Americans could return after being sunk challenged assumptions about invulnerability, forcing a reassessment of risk and strategy. Among the American forces, however, morale soared. Sailors and aviators had achieved what once seemed impossible. They had not only survived, but decisively altered the strategic balance in the Pacific. Strategically, the battle forced Japan onto the defensive. Prior to Midway, Japanese naval doctrine emphasized aggressive expansion and decisive carrier engagements. The destruction of 4 carriers forced a re-evaluation of offensive plans and curtailed ambitions for immediate further conquest in the Central Pacific. Commanders became more cautious, adjusting operational strategies to account for the newfound threat of American carrier resilience. The loss of experienced pilots and crew was irreplaceable in the short term, creating a strategic vulnerability that the Allies would exploit in subsequent campaigns. The events at Midway also underscored the centrality of aircraft carriers in modern naval warfare. Battleships, once considered the backbone of naval supremacy, had become secondary to the mobility, range, and striking power provided by carriers and their air wings. Both American and Japanese planners now understood that the fleet's strength rested in its ability to project air power across vast distances, a lesson that would define naval engagements for the remainder of the Pacific War. As the weeks passed, the broader consequences of Midway crystallized. Japanese industrial and strategic limitations meant that replacing lost carriers and trained pilots would take months, if not years. The destruction of Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu stripped the Imperial Japanese Navy of a significant portion of its offensive striking power. Ships that had been symbols of invincibility were now sunken hulks, leaving gaps in Japan's carrier coverage and forcing a shift to defensive operations across the Pacific. Admiral Yamamoto faced the difficult task of rebuilding morale while adapting strategy to a reality in which the U.S. Navy could recover more rapidly than expected. For the Americans, Midway was not merely a tactical victory. It was a psychological turning point. Sailors and aviators returned to their ships with heightened confidence, their faith in resilience and ingenuity reinforced by the realization that the Japanese assumption of American weakness had been catastrophically wrong. The U.S. Navy gained valuable combat experience in carrier operations, from coordinated strikes to rapid damage control, refining tactics that would become standard in later battles. Midway validated the integration of intelligence, technology, and training, proving that foresight and adaptability could overcome numerical or material disadvantages. The human cost on both sides was profound. Japanese losses included hundreds of experienced pilots, aircrew whose skills were honed through months of rigorous training and combat. The loss of these personnel had long-term repercussions. Replacements, no matter how well trained, could not immediately match the expertise and cohesion of the veterans who had been lost. On the American side, while casualties were significant, The preservation of key carriers and personnel allowed the Navy to sustain operational capability and maintain the initiative in subsequent campaigns across the Pacific. Reports from Midway would later circulate among naval historians, officers, and surviving personnel. Japanese dispatches, though censored and controlled, conveyed frustration and disbelief. For carriers lost in a single engagement, a scenario that had been deemed impossible before the battle. U.S. after-action reports celebrated the skill, courage, and resilience of the sailors and aviators who executed rapid strikes and precision attacks under extreme pressure. The disparity between expectation and reality, the shock of American carriers returning to fight, resonated as a lesson in the dangers of underestimating an enemy. Strategically, the Pacific theater had shifted. Japan could no longer conduct unopposed offensive operations, while the United States gained the confidence and capacity to project power across contested waters. The victory at Midway marked the beginning of a gradual shift in momentum, establishing a framework for subsequent campaigns in Guadalcanal, the Solomons, and beyond. The shock felt by the Japanese Navy, a combination of operational misjudgment, human vulnerability, and underestimation of resilience, would echo throughout the remainder of the war, fundamentally altering naval doctrine, planning, and the psychological landscape of the Pacific conflict. The Battle of Midway stands as a testament to the unpredictable nature of warfare, where assumptions can crumble in the face of resilience and adaptability. The shock experienced by the Japanese Navy, witnessing American carriers return from presumed destruction, was not merely a tactical surprise. It was a revelation of the human, technological, and strategic dimensions that define modern conflict. Confidence and overreach collided with intelligence, preparation, and sheer determination, producing a turning point that reshaped the Pacific War. Midway revealed that naval supremacy depended not solely on numbers or firepower, but on foresight, coordination, and the courage to act decisively under uncertainty. The Americans, battered but undeterred, leveraged every advantage, repaired carriers, decoded communications, and disciplined aviators capable of executing high-stakes attacks. Their success highlighted a profound principle of warfare. Resilience can convert apparent weakness into strength, and calculated risk can overturn even the most confident adversary. For Japan, the psychological impact was equally profound. The loss of 4 carriers and hundreds of experienced pilots shattered the illusion of invulnerability, forcing a re-evaluation of strategy and doctrine. The shock reverberated through naval culture, illustrating that even dominant forces could be undone by miscalculation, intelligence lapses, and the indomitable spirit of a determined enemy. Historically, Midway marked the moment the Pacific War shifted from Japanese expansion to American counteroffensive. Beyond the statistics and ship logs, it demonstrated the interplay of human will, technological innovation, and strategic insight. The return of the American carriers, against all Japanese expectations, symbolized more than survival. It embodied the principle that adaptability, intelligence, and courage can alter the course of history. In this, Midway remains a defining moment, reminding us that in war, as in life, the unexpected can change everything.